there is not much value in trying to rush through a budget in a very narrow window, 3 weeks, with a new cabinet, effectively a new finance minister, defense spending, the economic outlook, including the tariff relationship with the United States and the efficiency, all of those coming together, we will have a much more comprehensive, effective, ambitious, prudent budget in the fall.
The federal government will now deliver a full budget in the fall, but just last week on this program, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne insisted the feds could hold off on a full budget until next year.
First, you need to provide the tax break to Canadians, then the throne speech, then you have a substantive fall economic statement, so you have a clearer picture of the finance. But what I'm saying is that there will be no surprises in that, because we have already outlined in pretty much details during the campaign exactly how we're going to do it.
Let's bring in our front bench. With me tonight, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Brian, I'll start with you. Poor Minister Champagne last week spent like 10 minutes saying it's not necessary this year that we have a budget at all, and here are all the reasons why. And then on the weekend, the Prime Minister, very specifically said, oh, no, we will have a full budget. What do you think changed in the interim?
I'm not sure much changed, only because I think when you take what a fall economic statement usually is, which is kind of described as a mini budget, well, if you say we're going to have a substantive mini budget, at one point you're getting pretty close to just having a budget. So I think there is some semantics there, and I think Champagne and Carney were obviously not on the exact same page on communications, and to me that's probably the bigger problem, and we've seen that a few times from this government. That's not abnormal, I think, for a new government and for a new Prime Minister, but I would suggest and humbly advise that maybe they start to talk about communications a little bit more before people are going out on some of these big issues. And look, I think it's probably the right call to call it a budget, and I think it's the right call to also wait and ensure that it's a good document, it's a good policy investment, and making, taking a few months to do that makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels. It's not ideal in the parliamentary calendar, but having an election at the start of spring is not really ideal for that parliamentary calendar, so it's really no fault other than the idea that there is an election right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I can definitely understand, Lisa, how like a substantial fall economic statement, let's say, would have accomplished some of that. The only caveat I would offer is I remember on multiple instances, Minister Freeland, who was serving as finance minister, went to great lengths to tell me and other journalists, this is not a budget. This is not, don't call it a mini budget. They took issue with us even framing it that way. Maybe the intention was different here. But what the Prime Minister said, what Mark Carney said on the weekend was not exactly what Minister Champagne said last week.
Very true. And a budget has a whole different parliamentary procedure than the fall economic update does. There's a certain amount of debate that has to happen around it. It has to be passed. This is a minority government at the end of the day. So they have to make sure that they have the votes for whatever legislation they're putting before the House, which could be of a confidence motion. So I understand why they want to play with the semantics of it. But the reality of the situation is that the Department of Finance will still put out on a monthly basis what's called the fiscal monitor, and that's going to tell Canadians just how well their government is doing. Is it in a surplus? Is it not in a surplus? I would think that a government would actually want to be able to counter probably negative results that are going to be coming out of this fiscal monitor in the couple of months coming with their own plan going forward, because otherwise you're leaving the opposition with the ability to say, well, what are you doing now? Look how terrible it is. The numbers are deteriorating. Why aren't you acting more? And I would hearken back to what happened to us in 2008 and 2009 when we did come out with a budget in 2008, which was tone deaf when it came to what was happening with respect to the recession. And we saw our parliamentary lives flash before our eyes as a result and prorogued. So they should take a lesson from that it's important to have a budget. It's important to take your time on it. But at the same time, you can't stop people from commenting on information that's going to be flowing out. And communications aside, not talking to one another, I think it was a mistake to say that there wasn't going to be one. And maybe the Prime Minister decided, well, I'm going to take a page out of Doug Ford. I made a mistake. I'm going to admit I made a mistake. I'm going to change the decision.
I'll quickly just jump off that, Tom, and point out that the Conservatives today put out a release saying that they'll put together like an economic council, essentially populated by a few different MPs to study sort of what is going on with the economy. It seemed like a kind of direct response to all of the evolving arguments around whether or not there should be a budget. On the point of what the Prime Minister said over the weekend, it just felt last week that that didn't track either with the brand of Mark Carney during the campaign or thereafter, right? The way he spoke about the budget on the weekend was what you would expect, I think, from him. The way that they were talking about it last week just didn't, like, in this context, it didn't track.
It didn't track, and the question can honestly be posed, was that a mistake of communications by Champagne, or does he not really understand that there's a huge difference between the two? I can't believe for 1 second that he went out there on his own, gave that, by the way, same detailed explanation in French, tax cut first, throne speech second, economic update, no budget. I mean, it was clear as a bell. Look, last Tuesday, Vashi, you had an extraordinary interview, his first, with Prime Minister Carney after the election. He talked to you about the importance of being open to pipelines. Within 24 hours, Stephen Guilbeault, whose job now involves precisely nothing to do with pipelines, was out there saying, you know what, I've looked at it, we don't really need pipelines, and there are no proponents right now. So where's Mark Carney's Katie Telford? Where's the person who blows the whistle that it's end of recreation, that it's time for everybody to get into their lane and stop messing around with other people's stuff? Oh, and by the way, if you're going to go out there on budget versus fall economic update, maybe you should, get your signals all together. Look, I'll agree with Brian on one thing. It is normal. It's, they've all just arrived. They don't have staff. It's a bit of a mess. But you've got to have somebody in charge. I mentioned Katie Telford with a great deal of deference because she was Justin Trudeau's extraordinary chief of staff, but she was Justin Trudeau's chief of staff. And everybody knew that when she was speaking, it was him, but he didn't always have to take care of every detail. She was on it. Mr. Carney's going to have to concentrate on who that person's going to be for him. It's clearly not the people who are there right now.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens with respect to, I guess, even more generally staffing. It was more like the front-facing people, Rob, over the last few weeks. I will say, like, to Tom's point, it didn't feel as though the finance minister was making things up. You know what I mean? It seemed like there had been a directive, like, here is what we are planning to do, which is why the Prime Minister's comments over the weekend, were taken note of.
I think, it must have suddenly occurred to the PMO, and Tom's right, they're not staffed up yet, but they need to get staffed up soon. But I think it clearly occurred to them, maybe it was on the road, on the plane to the Vatican, on the plane to Rome. But you can't not have a budget. It's ridiculous. We've just had an election. We have a new government, and I think Mark Carney was elected because people thought he was competent and would have a plan and would be, show some capability at governing, and that includes having a budget. If the Tories had been elected on April 28th and said they weren't going to have a budget till next year, people would have been screaming blue murder, and rightly so. I think that he's gotten it right. But the other thing, to pivot, to jump off what Tom was just mentioning, your interview last week, Vashi, with the Prime Minister, I thought it was clear to me from watching that he's the boss, he's in charge, he is the government. So I don't really care what Stephen Guilbeault or any other minister says about this, that, or the other thing. At the end of the day, the Prime Minister is going to be the man with the plan. I think he's going to be the finance minister. I feel bad for Champagne, but I suspect that budget will be actually written by the Prime Minister.
But ultimately, Brian, I just have time for one last question, and we sort of touched on this last week. Like, if every day your cabinet ministers are coming out and contradicting you to one level or another, I think you were blaming the media for focusing on that last week, but we are going to take note of that. Like, you know what I mean? Regardless of the degree to which the Prime Minister says it's my world and they're all living in it, I think, like, we're so used to a system where, what a minister says matters to one degree or another. So if they're constantly contradicting, not to say that will be the case, this could just be the first few weeks, but I think that would have an impact.
Yeah, of course. And look, joking aside, the idea that the media is going to focus on discrepancies between ministers and the Prime Minister is completely normal and is to be expected, and that's why you have to do it as least as possible. And that's also why I agree with a lot of the comments of the colleagues where they got to get their act together, and whether it's because of staff, whether it's because they're not talking, whether it's because maybe somebody just didn't get the memo, frankly, on what the plan is, whatever, or maybe all of those things are not mutually exclusive. They got to get it done quickly. I think there's some grace. I think people recognize the government's just getting started, but they got to figure it out fairly quickly. Summer break might be helpful to them, but they have a budget to deliver, and there's a lot of expectations for sure.